Welcome back to Spotlight, where we highlight founders within the Yale community. Today we're lucky to be joined by Keith Pemberton, who is a junior at Yale. He's a fellow Branfordian. He's a major in history and also with a certificate in computing, culture, and society, and part of SciCity's accelerator program, building QuarterMill, which is, I think as you put it, infrastructure for trusted, queryable knowledge. So thank you so much for joining us today, Keith.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and actually just before we get started, before I found out you were coming on the show, I was just reading about what you're doing with QuarterMill, and I was just super interested. I thought it was very promising, very important, addressing a real need right now. So super happy that you're able to join us today. So I guess just diving right into it, just to get started, could you explain to someone, perhaps like a fellow Yale student, as simply as you can, what QuarterMill exactly does?
Absolutely. So QuarterMill is what I'm defining as this Bloomberg terminal for the human record. Right now, we're living in this age of where we don't know what's misinformation, what's AI-generated content. So how can we have a platform for verifiable knowledge that also keeps that chain of custody of provenance and source attribution?
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, just to break it down a bit further, so I saw that you have a partnership right now with the New Haven Museum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I guess, what exactly would an ideal use case look like? So, for example, with this partnership or, with any other partnerships that you might have, what is QuarterMill exactly doing for these organizations?
Absolutely. So with the New Haven Museum, we're actually helping process a lot of these archival documents. Some of them have been digitized, but they're not exactly discoverable in the sense of they may be siloed PDFs, they may be handwritten documents. So how can we bridge this gap between what's information and what's actually going to be human wisdom or human knowledge? Mm-hmm. And it goes through an 11-stage pipeline. So ingestion, and then also seeing, reading, extracting entities, connecting them, and then making it queryable as well, all while still preserving that original, where did the source come from, who wrote it, who was the archivist or librarian who, let's say, collected this document, transported from one institution to another. And that's something that modern AI systems just don't prioritize.
Gotcha, yeah. And I just wanted to touch a bit more about the kind of modern AI systems and why specifically, I guess, you found today as a really important time to be doing what you're doing in terms of ingesting, various documents, making them queryable, and how that really relates to kind of modern AI systems as you've touched upon.
Absolutely. So I think we could actually go back to the 90s with the age of the internet and everything coming to fruition with that. We had this massive scale of accessibility for information, but we also had this kind of contaminated data also flowing in. Let's say nefarious actors, for instance, putting inaccurate information on the web. We have Wikipedia, whose even, let's say, footnotes may also lead to dead links. And now we have large language models, and specifically generative AI, of which has downloaded the entire internet, flattened context, and present this as ground truth or the golden source of truth, when in fact, how can you have this golden or ground truth when your original source of knowledge is already contaminated? And that's where I see what's wrong with AI systems today. How can we actually have a pathway for human students like ourselves to access what we know is true, knowing where it came from, so we can actually build proprietary technology on top of that?
Perfect, yeah. And I just wanted to, dive a bit deeper. You mentioned, kind of what AI systems are doing right now, and not really, I think an important word that you use is provenance, and really tracing back the knowledge to where it's actually coming from. It's not something that, AI systems today that are doing. And I guess if you were to explain simply how what QuarterMill does kind of differs from this architecture that AI systems have, and how you were able to, have this provenance and trace your information accurately and credibly back to where it came from.
Absolutely. So I think the first explanation for that is actually looking at what modern AI systems do when you ask it a question. For example, I was looking into Frederick Douglass, and he gave a speech about 4th of July, and I asked it, how do you know this information? And it points not towards a direct source, but rather a list of sources where you could find information about his speech. And that is directly, I think, what distinguishes QuarterMill from modern AI systems, where we actually operate in this is the ground truth of the information coming in, and then you query a question, it points directly back to a page, a specific line on a text that references what you're asking. So not just, let's say, messy data put into an AI system and saying, this is the next statistical probable word to come after this word, or this is the next, these are a list of sources that make sense in regards to your question, but actually grounding it in what we already have in our database.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I think it really gets back to kind of one of the biggest problems that people are saying with like AI models today as hallucinations.
Right.
And you talked about, or you seem to be mentioning like the circular nature of referencing, where the question's coming from rather than, what the source actually is.
Right.
So I guess back to, how the QuarterMill, the architecture works, something you mentioned was like the cryptographic chain of custody. Could you kind of break that down a bit further? What exactly is that, if you could put it simply and try to explain it to the rest of us?
Absolutely. So it really came from me doing a lot of research into how artificial intelligence and different technologies are actually trying to tie documents together. And cryptographic is like essentially like it's a footprint or like an ID of sorts for each document as it goes through the QuarterMill system. So we're not just, let's say, saying this source came from this person, this document throughout the entire system, but we're actually seeing how did our system process or structure information within the document? What were the confidence intervals and accuracy surrounding that? So when you actually get the end product, you're not only looking at, okay, this is where the information came from, but this is how confident we are in this information down to the like single character in a specific word.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess something I wanted to ask, as someone very knowledgeable about the space, is we've talked about what QuarterMill is doing, but then when you look at these big institutions, your libraries, museums, these institutions with a lot of archival data, what is the current kind of database? What is the current infrastructure, and how does that differ from what you're trying to be doing?
Absolutely. So today, the current infrastructure for a lot of archives, libraries, and museums is kind of rooted in the early 2000s. So some of them are, or most of them, honestly, because 85% of the world's cultural heritage data is undigitized. But the part that are in these massive digital kind of siloed archive that are essentially PDFs uploaded to a website, web link, of which has been scraped by a lot of AI systems already, but is also not inherently discoverable. For example, if you do a keyword search for, let's say, my name Keith in a certain database, you may get 500 different PDF pages in a different language. How discoverable is that for someone who may not speak a certain language or may not be familiar with just perusing through handwritten text in cursive from 200 years ago? And I think that's where certain archives and libraries and museums sit right now. The information not only being scraped and kind of taken away from them by AI systems with no means of recourse, but it's also that a lot of it isn't inherently discoverable, although it's been digitized. And this kind of thing between what's digitized versus what is actually inherently like knowledge is something I'm trying to bridge with QuarterMill.
Got you. Yeah. I guess the question that I have from that is, you mentioned how, all this data, AI models are scraping it, but they're not actually, it's not discoverable. And I guess my question is, what's the reason behind this? What's the reason why, if the AI models are scraping this data, how come it's not discoverable? Like, why is there a disconnect there? And I guess, what are you trying to do to try to solve that?
Right. So I think when it comes to being discoverable, you have to really root it in like the ideas of archival stewardship and archival protocol. So to be discoverable, I think you need to discover where something came from, like where it originated from. And these AI systems just input all this data, turning into tokens and ingest it into the system. You lose the record of authority or the authoritativeness of a document or a collection when it's put alongside tons of other collections, which may be secondary sources, could also be AI-generated content as well.
Yeah. And I think, part of what you're mentioning and something else I wanted to touch on is, the fact that you're actually connecting each source to one another. So it's not looking at everything in isolation, but, you're finding key people, key facts, key sources and connecting it together. I think you mentioned a verified knowledge graph. And I think that term specifically, I was just very curious what that means and how that actually looks like in practice in terms of connecting, different sources together.
Absolutely. And that's actually at the core of our system when it comes to knowledge graph, which is more so from the digital humanities realm. So it's that when a document or collection goes into QuarterMill, extracting entities, peoples, places, events of note. And then when the next document comes in the next collection, that information is already in the knowledge graph. So we can see different ties between peoples with the same name, same initials, events that may be, let's say, from a different person's perspective, and also places as they've evolved over time in different documents.
Got it. And is this idea of kind of verified knowledge graph something that is already put in practice? Is it something that AI models today use, or perhaps existing databases, or where did you come up with this, or where did it come from?
Right. So right now there's some innovation within GraphRag, which is knowledge graphs, and then retrieval augmented generation. So only like these AI models are only pulling from what's in a knowledge graph, but the idea of provenance still isn't there within GraphRag. So having to put that architecturally from the beginning to actually scale up, so making sure you're attributing sources while still pulling from this knowledge graph.
Got it. Yeah, that's very cool. I also wanted just to take a step back and kind of big picture wise. I remember reading something, I think it was from Andreessen Horowitz. They had a blog post about kind of the big ideas of 2026, kind of the ideas for startups they want to be seeing and kind of the big trends. And one of them kind of fit exactly what you're doing in terms of, I think the quote was, just in terms of like multimodal enterprise data. So you have a lot of unstructured, I think they said untangling unstructured data becomes a generational opportunity, referring to the fact that today, because of agentic workflows, a lot of AI models, and the need for more data. However, the inputs actually becoming messier, which are leading to hallucinations, as you mentioned. And I think particularly why this is interesting, because you seem to be starting off in terms of the archival space, but I think you've also mentioned that you see this, you envision this in terms of in working in separate spaces as well, separate verticals. I think you mentioned like pharma, legal, other places as well. I just would love for you to speak more about the applicability of what you're doing right now in terms of archival data to being implemented across separate verticals as well.
Absolutely. So yeah, I honestly do see it applicable to other spaces, and starting with archives or cultural heritage, because I see this as like the foundation of human memory, a civilization. You can't really build off anything if you don't know what came before. So seeing history as that kind of bedrock. And when it comes to other verticals, thinking about legal, for example, how it's a gathering of different sources to support a case. And when it comes to pharmaceuticals and different procedures for that, like how we could, let's say, draw from different trials and information from that data, from that quantitative or qualitative, to support a research proposal going forward for the implementation of a new drug. And then also when it comes to our actual scientific data, for example, what the United States Geological Service is doing, or even NOAA, like how much digitized or undigitized field journal they have from scientists over the past couple of decades, that it's just not inherently discoverable, or you can't just, when you read in isolation, it's hard to connect different dots together. QuarterMill also serving as that kind of fundamental pipeline for trusted data going forward for any downstream use case.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the way that you put it is quite clear in the fact that, different industries, they might have different kinds of data, but it's all comes down to the same problem in terms of, mapping, different entities or different sources, like you mentioned with archival data. I think that is definitely very applicable. And I also wanted to ask, why the name QuarterMill? How did you come up with that? Why you feel like that's the best fit for what you're trying to do?
Right. So I officially incorporated QuarterMill and started working on it seriously in late December. But I started with this idea of how can we bring history and public memory into the age of artificial intelligence accurately and efficiently last July. And I was like, by July 2026, I really want to have something that I think is, promoting a public good and responsible technology. And right now, America, we're celebrating 250 years of American history and of our country's founding. And QuarterMill is, quarter of a million years, so 250 years. Thinking of that like a perfect segue into, minting the future from the past.
Right, yeah. Wow, that's very interesting. And actually, I wanted to touch a bit more about kind of your background in history. I think that's super interesting. Seems like a lot of, you have this kind of unique mix of both history and also, you call yourself a historian, also a technologist. So having both sides, and how, your background in that have really allowed you to, informed the way you've built QuarterMill, kind of your approach and how you view things. I would love to hear a bit more about that kind of very unique intersection between history and technology in the way that you're building QuarterMill.
Right, yeah. So I feel like the fact that I started as like a historian, like a humanist, and then went into like this technical realm of coding really grounded me. And even going back 8-9 years, I was into my family genealogy. We've been in North Carolina for over 300 years in my mother's side of the family, and seeing how the archives were dispersed, seeing how information in itself wasn't translating to knowledge, wisdom on this kind of chain of what is verifiable information has always stuck with me, of not being able to know exactly what is true, what is not true, and dealing with these gaps. And having been here at Yale, having been an RA in the Library of Congress, helped with some binary key exhibits as well, and then also being a history major and doing archival research across Africa, but also in the Caribbean as well. It's really helped shape my perspective on how we can accurately bring information into this new technological age where innovation is going faster than actual verification evidence.
Wow, yeah. I think, the focus on information, I think, as you put it, is especially important. I guess I've never really thought about that intersection between information and from a historical lens with technology today. And I guess coming from that, like, was there like a specific moment that you can point to where you really found the need for, which led to you building QuarterMill today, where you really spotted, this is a problem that really needs to be addressed?
Absolutely. I was in Ghana, Accra, doing archival research in December of 2025, and I was dealing with Kwame Nkrumah. He was the first president of Ghana, and he was also kind of leading the decolonization movement on a broader scale. And I was looking at his personal papers, his correspondence, and I realized like how much of this hasn't been digitized, how much of it isn't on the web, and thus how much of it also isn't in large language models. And even trying to do, side-by-side comparisons, or even understanding what large language models knew or the internet knew versus what I was looking at in person, there were stark contrasts. And it made me realize, like, we really need to be able to have a way to have information more discoverable, especially for, let's say, histories that may have not been prioritized or for one reason or another didn't make their way into large language models, or are just kind of overwhelmed by the majority training data where they're kind of silenced. Wanting to create a new platform or infrastructure that actually addresses that problem from the beginning through kind of equally, or like valuing evidence equally throughout this kind of ingestion process.
Wow, okay. Yeah. I mean, I think also something, since you only started this, like, I think you mentioned December, right, was when this idea was at its first inception. To today, it's only March, and you've already, been working, executing really quickly. You've had partnerships already. Seems like your product has been gaining a lot of traction. I guess, what have your biggest learnings been in such a short amount of time? You've been working very hard, very quickly. What has your experience been like, first of all? And secondly, what has been your biggest takeaways from moving so quickly?
Right. So I feel like moving so quickly has been both like, it's been a blessing, having so many people both in the Yale community, but also the broader cultural heritage community being willing to engage with me in the critical epistemological questions I'm asking about knowledge and information. And I would say a challenge really has been the fact that we have this information that is already being scraped. So there's a lot of uncertainty of how to engage with artificial intelligence and even, let's say, technology right now from these institutions. And that's a very valid concern. So it's trying to find a way to navigate institutional constraints, working within the idea of me being a historian, but also valuing archives and making them more queryable and discoverable. Alongside the idea of we have to preserve provenance. And it's like all these ideas are coming together, I think, in a way that we haven't had before when it comes to history, the humanities, and also the scalability of what's happening with artificial intelligence right now. We're trying to keep up, but I think we actually need to ground ourselves more and let's kind of slow down when it comes to evidence and information that enters these systems, so we're making sure we're doing it the right way so we don't have consequences 30 years down the road where we're basing our entire, let's say, curriculum or idea of a person or of an event based off what was input into an AI system when a whole nother narrative, a whole nother history has been left out.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I think the philosophical question that you've brought up between kind of, on one side, history and preserving knowledge versus trying to move quickly in the age of AI and trying to, AI just like scraping a lot of data, scraping all the available knowledge without really considering where it's coming from. I guess within that debate, you touched on it a little bit, but where do you stand and what is QuarterMill trying to do in terms of trying to kind of consider the needs of both sides, and what is your approach to this kind of question or debate?
I would say working alongside, hand in hand with institutions and communities to make sure their data, their histories, and their memory is not left out of the future. And right now, it's presenting as if AI systems and large language models, however artificial intelligence may move about in the next decade, will be the future. So in order to not to be left behind, we have to find a way to bridge this gap while also preserving their data in a way that doesn't take away from them like it's currently doing right now.
Totally. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I also wanted to ask a bit more about your journey building. I think it's very interesting. And, what you've been able to do in such a short amount of time is super impressive. But yeah, I would say our first question, within kind of the 3-4 month span that you've been building, what has been the biggest obstacle so far? And from that, what has been your biggest learning as well?
I would say time. Like, there's only 24 hours in a day, and someone has to go to work sleeping, still being a student right now as well. So how can I actually delegate time towards building, but also building partnerships? And I would say one thing that's really been helpful is the sophistication of vibe coding, tools, right, which, still has to be put within certain parameters and checked, but it's really allowed me to go from 0 to 100 really quick, while also being in line with what I want from technology. So responsible technology that's just not, let's say, keep on draining resources at the same time.
Yeah, I think also what's super impressive is that you've been able to do all this as just a one-person team, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Yes. So how have you been able to do this? Like, what exactly are the tools that you've been leveraging, and especially balancing, like you mentioned, classes as well, being a full-time student. How are you able to leverage these tools, and what have you been able to do so much as only a one-person team?
Right. So certain tools come to mind: Codex, Claude Code, and I'm also a Perplexity student ambassador. Now, that's not directly like a coding application, at least in its current form, but even just like a search engine of sorts, which is helpful in just consolidating my ideas if I don't have anyone to, let's say, bounce it off of if it's 4 a.m. in the morning, right, but I still want to get work done. And I would say, when it comes to even advisor recommendations I have for someone who's building solo right now is that it's always good to have people you can rely on, even if it's a network bouncing ideas off of, but you can really do a lot now as a solo founder that you could not do, I would say, 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. The idea of being a CEO and a CTO right now is also, very, very probable, position you can be in. I will say, I am 100% wanting to expand, bringing on less so contract developers, but also people who are going to join the QuarterMill team, passionate about what I'm passionate about, and want to see it through, for the long run.
Definitely, yeah, that's really cool to hear about. And I guess one of the final questions is, where you are right now. Obviously, still very on in the process. What is one thing that you're still trying to figure out, whether it's about building, whether it's about QuarterMill, the problem that you're trying to address, about potential partnerships, potential clients? What is one thing that you're still trying to work on as of right now?
Absolutely. I feel like one thing I'm really wanting to work on is, I feel like a couple of things. So one thing is continuously wanting to sophisticate the system, building QuarterMill, while also building partnerships, and not getting so focused on, let's say, the technical aspects where I miss the human in the loop aspects, which is a very integral part of QuarterMill, because right now a lot of AI systems really work autonomously, right, without having human review or human in the loop. And I think when it comes to archives and how, let's say, they're translated into digital systems or AI systems, you cannot have a human in the loop, and that's built into QuarterMill. So making sure I keep these human elements as well. And then I think another thing is, bringing, as I was saying, more people onto the team is something that I want to move forward doing. Also, in pursuit of, non-dilutive funding as well, as we build out QuarterMill in a way that's still sticking towards its original mission. And we're a Startup EO finalist currently for the New Haven Civic Innovation Prize, and also we're in the Tri-State Summer Fellowship. So excited to build out QuarterMill, for as long as it takes.
Yeah, it's great to hear. And I guess just to finish it off, to other fellow students, aspiring entrepreneurs, student entrepreneurs, what is one piece of advice that either you took or that you would like to pass on to everyone else?
I would say specifically here at Yale, relying on your professors, the Yale community, Science City. When it comes to professors specifically, like I don't think sometimes we realize how highly esteemed some of our professors are, how much groundbreaking research they're doing, and how much they could be a sounding board for your ideas, but also even connect you with people who you would not be able to get in contact with otherwise. And I think that's the beauty of going to an institution like Yale.
Wow. Yeah. Really, really. Yeah. Appreciate that. And thank you so much for your time again. This was
Of course,
really great.
thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Great.